words for today's service on reproductive justice are from former Unitarian Universalist Association President Reverend William G. Sinkford, who said, "Most churches would not welcome a conversation about sexuality, but Unitarian Universalism does. And it is because we have a deeply held understanding that our faith and our religious life must be grounded in real lived experience." The words of Reverend Sinkford. That, in some sense, is at the heart of Unitarian Universalism. Children are a gift. Children are a lot of hard work. Raising children in the US is expensive, time-consuming, and often unsupported. Children can be disappointing. Children have their own lives to live. Children have inherent worth and dignity. Each of these statements is true, and they may seem contradictory, and yet we can hold them all, can't we? And we can understand the complex truth in each of them. Now, pregnancy can be a gift too, in the right season, in the right weather, in the right forest. But as the story of the redbud tree tells us, the meaning of a pregnancy, the meaning of a life for each person is different. Gift or curse, disappointment or terror, beauty, joy, or desolation. Depending on our circumstances, depending on our season, depending on our level of autonomy, what is a beautiful gift can be a terror. Now, I am not here this morning to debate the abortion question with anyone. It is a morally complex issue. There is no denying that. It involves competing interests, clashing needs, and many, many different voices. However, I will tell you, I will share with you my point of view that a pregnant person should not have fewer rights than a corpse. And what I mean by that is that no living person can be compelled to give any part of their body, whether it's a hangnail or a vital organ, to another person, not even to save that other person's life. Not even after you have died can you be compelled to give body parts that you no longer need to help another person survive. And such is the bodily autonomy of a human. Such is the legal framework of our society for everyone except for uterus-bearing people. For people of that reproductive potential, especially if Roe versus Wade is overturned, as we know it is threatened to be very soon, they can possibly be compelled by a government entity to donate their bodies to support the potential life of an embryo or a fetus. Now, this is a complicated question, and I am not here to say that that there should be a simple answer. But I have done my share of thinking about this, and I strongly believe, after my experiences as a social worker, as a mother, as a woman, that no one should be compelled to become pregnant, to carry a pregnancy, or to raise a child against their will. Now, it happens that the American public also broadly supports this point of view, as well as the Unitarian Universalist Association, which since 1986 has consistently produced statements of conscience and social justice witness statements supporting the right of pregnant people to choose, the right of uterus-bearing people to choose whether or not they become a parent. And it's a complicated question, but I think we can be guided by our principles. First, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The inherent worth and dignity of a person's life is what's at stake here. I was 21 when I attended my first pro-choice abortion rights rally. So this has been a long journey for me. Of course, nearly all of my life, Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land, as it is threatened to not be anymore. Now, at that very first rally, which was also my very first foray into social justice, in Seattle, Washington, in the summer of 1989, I first heard a speaker use this phrase, and it has stayed with me ever since. She called the anti-choice, anti-abortion, pro-life folks, she called them pro-one breath of lifers. Pro-one breath of lifers. And she accused them of not really caring very much about what living children experienced. Not really caring that much about what kind of a life those children will have, whether they'll be supported, whether they will have clean air, good food, decent schools, loving parents, a comfortable home. And I have to say, I agree with Sister Joan Chittister from here in Erie, who says that people like that, people who want a child born but are not worried about a child fed, a child clothed, and a child loved, have a severely lacking morality. Now, I was 33 when I started a job as a birth mother counselor, as a counselor for women who had unintended pregnancies. I was a social worker. I saw the horrible judgment exacted on women who made the decision, the very difficult decision, to sustain a pregnancy through 9 months and then make a plan of adoption for a child that they were not able to raise themselves. And so what I see is a no-win situation when a woman has an unintended pregnancy. When a person with a uterus has an unintended pregnancy, there is no decision that they can make that society will not judge them for. And I'll get to some of that later on. But I also saw the harm to young women who were forced to make a decision that was not theirs. Whether it was to end the pregnancy or whether it was to become a parent. Anytime that a woman, a person, was forced to become a parent against their will, I saw depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts in some cases. I also saw the hypocrisy of many pro-life families who, when it came to their own family members, made a different choice. And I saw, most of all, the struggles of women who chose to parent another child amidst crushing poverty and abuse and mental health struggles and lack of support from the community. And I was 40 years old when, in the state of Texas, I myself had a devastating miscarriage at 13 weeks, a medical event that required intervention and aftercare, including what is called a D&C, dilation and curettage, in which the materials of pregnancy are excised from the uterus surgically. This was a procedure that was necessary for my health, and for which, if I had had it today in the state of Texas, I might have been criminally investigated, and my doctor might also have been under suspicion. Now, we have known for many decades, how to make abortion rare. It is to provide effective birth control to all those who need it, and to provide science-based sexual and reproductive education to people as they grow and develop. The kind of learning, the kind of education and support that young people can gain from our Unitarian Universalist sexuality education program called Our Whole Lives. If we do these things, as has been done in other countries, research shows that abortion rates go down. Now, there has been a lot of talk about when a pregnancy becomes viable. And I want to ask a different question today. I don't want to ask about medical, developmental thresholds. I want to ask whether our society is a viable one for families and children. Because viable, you see, has many different meanings. There's the biological meaning of the pregnancy and how far along a pregnancy is, but there's also another meaning, and I want to read it to you now. Viable can also mean capable of being done with means at hand or circumstances as they are. And I want to ask whether we are a viable society for families and children right now. Is American culture capable of supporting families and children with the means at hand and circumstances as they are? When a child care credit that lifted millions out of poverty is not renewed in the middle of crushing inflation. When childbirth is forced on pregnant people, and yet the resources to raise that child are denied to them. I would argue that our culture is not a viable container for healthy family life. When a baby formula shortage reveals stunning cracks in our nation's food manufacturing and delivery systems, and parents who are desperate to feed their infants are told, "Why don't you just breastfeed?" Our society is not a viable container for families and children. when housing, a living wage, decent amounts of time off after the hard work of giving birth are only privileges afforded to some, those who are already most fortunate. We are not a viable container for families and children. When most families can only make ends meet and put food on the table and a roof over their heads if both parents are in the workplace, and yet childcare is so hard to find that those who have the money to pay it still cannot find a spot for their child so that they can go to work. And those who don't make a lot of money can't even afford to put one child in childcare because of the high cost. And yet, daycare workers who provide that service, who are essential, we said, during the pandemic. Daycare workers are the lowest paid sector of our economy and 3 times more likely to live in poverty than anyone else in the workforce. When most states spend more money on prisons than they do on our education system. When schools here in Erie, grocery stores, movie theaters, restaurants are places of mass shootings. When an epidemic of suicide, depression, and anxiety is affecting our adolescent age children. When youth voices raised against gun violence, against mass incarceration and climate destruction are jeered, ignored, or silenced by other members of the community. The ignorance, the lack of support, the lack of interest, and the outright hatred for parents and children are chilling. And I would argue that as we are now, we are not a viable place for most people to raise their children. Not for any but the most privileged families. Not in 2022. The outlook is bleak. And is it any wonder that birth rates are plunging? That people are choosing not to have children in our society at incredible rates we've never seen before. And it should be their choice, but we must also ask, are we making it too difficult? Now, what can any of us do about this, we ask? What can any one of us, any group of us do? These problems, they feel too big to contain and to understand or even begin to work on. Well, we can devote ourselves to a reproductive justice framework. Reproductive justice is a concept that was first put forward by collective groups of women of color starting in the 1960s and 70s, groups such as the Combahee River Collective, taken up by other groups such as Sister Song. Reproductive justice has a much broader agenda than simply reproductive rights as we framed them in the past, or even reproductive health, which concerns the health of both children and people capable of bearing children. An important framework, but reproductive justice goes even further than that, asking whether children have healthy air, healthy schools, healthy families, healthy homes. All of these are necessary to provide a place for a child to grow up. All of these. The reproductive justice framework states 4 broad principles: that people have a right to have children, that people have a right not to have children if that is their choice, that people have a right to raise their children in safe and healthy environments, supported by a safe and healthy community, and that people have a right to health and self-determination regarding their bodies and their sexuality, free from oppression and shame. Those are the 4 broad principles of reproductive justice. Now, education, gun control, mental health parity, support for childcare, for fair labor laws, for parental leave, for, as I said, comprehensive sex education. I'm getting a little too excited here about this topic. Comprehensive sex education, healthcare reform. There are so many ways when we start to look around that our whole society, the fabric of our whole society, is all bound up with this idea of reproductive justice. There are so many ways that we can lend a hand to make our society more viable. Which one would you feel drawn to? Or do you know someone who's parenting a child right now? Do you know someone who could use a little bit of extra support? What could you do? What could you do when you see that person struggling? Friends, it is all of our responsibility to make our society a healthy container for all people at all stages of their development, for families and children. And we need to begin. We need to roll up our sleeves and begin. Every single one of us can play a part. We can envision that healthy society, and then we can figure out where we want to plunge in our little bit to make it happen. We want to lend a hand so that, like that forest that contained the redbud tree, no matter what season that tree is in, no matter what the circumstances in which lives unfold, the entire forest is a healthy container and more capable of sustaining the growth of all living things. That's what we need to do here and now for future generations. May we all get busy doing it. Amen.